Welcome to No Stage, Just a Chair. I'm Brian, and this is me trying to figure things out without pretending I already know how. If I sound foolish, that means it's working. Music sounds a little 80s? Good. I was basically raised on sense and questionable hair choices. And if any of this sounds familiar, pull up a chair. It's always been really hard to describe what it is that I am. It's always been hard. It's still hard to this day. My language is getting better for it. The way that I think about it is getting better. It's getting clearer. But it's always been hard to describe how I fit, because there are all these categories and all these ways of thinking, and none of them ever felt quite right. And I always have felt this pressure to make sense in every room that I'm in. And as a result, one of the things that I said about myself was I would refer to myself as a creative hybrid. And I would refer to myself as a creative hybrid, not because it sounded impressive. It was never about sounding impressive. It was because I always felt the pressure, and I think the pressure is real, but I always felt the pressure to be, for all intents and purposes, bilingual. And I don't mean speaking different languages literally, but philosophically. Because I entered enough rooms as a creative, surrounded by business people, that I almost had to translate on the fly. I had to understand, I had to take into account my audience so that they would understand why I existed in that room. Because as a creative, so much of the time, you kind of got pushed into a corner. I've said this throughout my career. The reason that I initially got some traction as a musician is because I'm an organized musician. And it doesn't mean that organization is my superpower. It just meant that whenever I showed up, I was ready. And I did session work for a studio actually right here in town. And they would call me when whoever was supposed to do the session flaked out or screwed up. And I kept getting those calls, and I would get calls at the last minute, and I would rescue them because I could show up. I'd be prepared. I knew the parts. I was ready to go. I could step in and I could do it. And as a result, after a while, they just started calling me, and I became their first call guy. And being the first call guy, it meant that I made less per session, but I got a lot more sessions. When they call you as an emergency, it's kind of like calling a plumber on the weekend. Rates go way up, but it's also the weekend. It's the pain of it. And instead, it's like, we're just going to call you. You're going to be our person because when you show up, you're ready. And as a result, not only was I a musician, but I started to help out in the office. I started helping out with our travel plans. I started helping out with booking. I started helping out with labor relations. I started helping out with other things. And in the middle of helping out with other things, it kind of got me into rooms that weren't just creatives. So as a result, I learned to translate imagination into language that made sense in business rooms. And it was mostly so that ideas wouldn't get dismissed. In those rooms, as a creative, they're automatically looking at you with a little bit of skepticism. They're looking at you with a little bit of disregard. So what I had to do was translate inside so that they can understand on the outside. And that became a part of the way that I engaged with the world. And I actually really enjoy it because there are elements of all of those things that are at work inside of me. Maybe it's because I've cultivated it. Maybe it's because I'm naturally wired that way. But there are elements of all those things that are at work inside of me. And as I fast forward towards the future, as I arrive into what it is that I am now, I can remember when my youngest son was in second grade, one day he came home from school and he said, "Dad, we talked about what you do in reading class today." I'm instantly intrigued. You talked about what I do in reading class. So what do I do? Because he's in second grade. Does he think that I paint noses on clowns? Like, does he really understand what it is that I do? And he said, we talked about what you do in reading class today. And I said, tell me more. And he said, my second grade son, I think he's 7 years old at this point. 7. Yeah, probably 7 years old. He said, today we talked about context clues. What are context clues? And he said, context clues are about understanding meaning based on the words that are around it. And that's not exactly what he said, but that's the gist of what he said. Because again, I'm translating from second grade language to adult language right now. But here's the thing that he did say, and that I remember very clearly. He said, you walk into rooms, you hear all of those words, and you figure out what they actually mean. And I looked at him and I thought, number one, this kid is brilliant. And number two, I thought he actually does know what I do, probably more than I know what I do. Somehow he picked up the context clues that I couldn't even pick up for myself. I was so close to it that I couldn't even see it. And he saw it for me, and immediately something crystallized inside of me. I walk into rooms, I hear all those words, and I figure out what they actually mean. So not only am I translating from myself to the rest of the world, but I'm also translating the rest of the world to myself and wider. I'm sitting in a room with scientists and trying to figure out what it is that they're actually saying. I sit in a room with engineers and I try to figure out what it is that they're actually saying. I sit in a room with architects and I try to figure out what it is that they're actually saying. I sit in a room with candle makers and I try to figure out what it is that they actually care about. So I kind of landed as a creative hybrid into this space of being a translator. And here's the thing that I want you to see, because there is this very logical transition that I want you to follow along with, and I'm going to say it very concretely. Translation, discernment, pattern recognition. Translation, discernment, pattern recognition. That's the process. That's the thing. That is the background activity that's happening in my brain, in my head, in my heart, in my insides all the time. Translation, discernment, pattern recognition. And that is the nature of being that creative hybrid. Now, there have been some interesting things that have happened over the years as a result of being that creative hybrid. In 2000, and I think it was 7, somewhere in that range, might have been earlier. Who cares? Had a conversation with several musicians, people from our record label, and the conversation was about Napster and iTunes and file sharing and downloads and the proliferation of digital music. And in that conversation, there was a lot of panic, there was a lot of anxiety, there was a lot of worry, because it was breaking the system that they had built. Because the system that they had built hinged on the value of CDs, the value of records, the value of this particular piece, this particular formation of the art. And all of a sudden, iTunes was disrupting that. And all of a sudden, Napster was disrupting that. And there are probably a lot of you that are here right now that don't even have any idea what Napster is, and you should Google it. But it was a thing that was changing the landscape of music in those years. And in the midst of all that anxiety, I was watching an industry trying to protect its recordings. And I looked at it and I said something then that I have thought about ever since. I made a statement in one of the meetings, but I also made this statement at a ton of Q&As, a ton of panel discussions, a ton of industry discussions. As a matter of fact, I probably even wrote articles about it. Um, I said this pretty widely and broadly. And my thought was this: I think in that moment, because of piracy, because of iTunes, because of streaming, because of everything that was happening, the landscape of music was being shifted. And in the midst of the panic of that landscape being shifted, everybody was trying to figure out where this was going to land and how it was that they could protect their recordings. And I said, my opinion, that what we were going to see music industry turn into over the next decade, 2 decades, is we would see that music would start to look more like music looked like in the 50s than any other time period. Because in the 50s, the priority was the live experience, not the recording. The recordings only existed to give people memorabilia to buy from that night. They bought t-shirts, they bought things, they bought memorabilia to remember that night, to memorialize that night. People would hear music on the radios, but at the end of the day, the thing that really drove the industry was the live experience and was experiences. And I said then that I think live is going to become primary again. It's going to be the thing that is the revenue driver. Album sales will follow live music. Album sales will follow the experience. Artists and revenue streams will follow the experience. And as a result, festivals, tour houses, and those experiential things are going to drive entertainment. It wasn't a prediction. It was synthesis. It was me looking at history, looking at behavior, looking at technology, and seeing how they all fit together. Because what I was doing in that moment, remember, we talked about this: translation, discernment, pattern recognition. Translation, discernment, pattern recognition. I'm looking at streaming music. I'm looking at iTunes. I'm looking at Napster. I'm looking at all those things. And I recognize a pattern. And it was a pattern that we had already been in once before, because the truth is there's nothing new under the sun. There's nothing new. Back then it sounded abstract. It maybe sounded far-fetched. But if you look at the industry today, now it sounds obvious. And this is not me saying, hey, look, I was right. It's me saying that the translator, the pattern recognition, and the thing that is fundamentally a superpower of creatives was the driver of that insight. Now, fast forward to 2026. I've actually watched something change. I've watched this change in the last 2 years, and I've watched it change even more in the last 6 months. I'm watching companies, corporations, not small ones, large ones, small ones also, but companies of all sizes are investing in creative thinking deliberately, because there is this shift that's happening that is valuing the creative point of view. And I think part of that shift is coming from, and I'm making a guess here, we have more tools than ever before. We have more infrastructure. We have more options. We have more of all of those things. And here's my statement: when everything is possible, discernment is magic. We have every option under the sun. We can do anything and everything. I'm watching very small companies, because of software, because of AI, because of everything that's happening right now. The possibilities and the options are exploding exponentially. And as a result, they have access to all of these tools. And in the middle of having access to all these tools, there can be tremendous activity and very little value. And as a result, the value of discernment, the value of pattern recognition is rising. The creative point of view is becoming more important because the world got more complex. It's not fashionable. It's functional. It's not about the costume. It's about the value. Creatives see the possibilities, and on some level, sometimes even see the future. And they see the future because of translation, discernment, pattern recognition. I'm going to name some neighborhoods: Dumbo, Chelsea, Williamsburg, Greenpoint, Wicker Park, Arts District of Los Angeles. I'm not just naming some of the hottest properties in America, not just naming some of the hottest neighborhoods in America. I am mentioning neighborhoods where creatives moved in first. And in whatever city that you're in, you can probably name that neighborhood too. Creatives moved in first because they moved in first because they could see the bones. They could see, guess what? The patterns at work. And they saw it before the investors did. So you know what a lot of investors do? We even know that this happened in the 70s. There were fashion designers who would go to Harlem to notice what was happening in fashion in Harlem to translate that to the runway. So they were co-opting the ideas that were on the streets into and integrating them into their fashion. Because creativity was running amok in the best possible way. And now we have investors who are watching where creatives are moving in because they identify that as the next hot neighborhood, the next hot zip code, the next hot area in the city. Because creatives move in and they see the light before the spreadsheets do. I'm not making a leap here. This is a pattern. So here's what I want you to think about. In the world we live in right now, we don't suffer from scarcity anymore when it comes to information. When it comes to options and possibilities, we don't suffer from scarcity anymore. We suffer from saturation. We have more options than we know. We have more options than we can use. There are more possibilities than we can ever possibly engage. And in a saturated world, coherence wins. When the world becomes layered, integration becomes essential. Think on those thoughts. They're very nuanced, they're very detailed, and they are the things that, quite frankly, are the basic operating system of creatives. They are the fundamental foundational operating system. These are the background tasks that are running in creatives all the time. Translation, reading context, synthesis, seeing arcs in the complexity, in a world that's become layered, exercising discernment, and deploying and showing, demonstrating coherence. We're seeing the creative have a seat at the table in the business world in a way that we've not seen in a very long time. I want to say something really ridiculous, but I'm not going to say something really ridiculous. I don't want to be the hype person. I don't want to be the hyperbolic person. I don't want to be the overstater. I want to be the person that is very measured in what I'm saying. But I will say that the creative has a seat at the table of business in a way that we've not seen in a very long time. Because of all the options that are available, the person who can connect the dots becomes a superhero. That's the creative operating system, connecting the dots, seeing the patterns. The value is always there. The recognition is just catching up. And as a result, I don't know that creative hybrid is a category anymore. Maybe it's just part of what leadership looks like now. We have a seat at the table. We have an opportunity to be what we are. We have an opportunity to sit side by side with other thinkers and other thoughts, and our words carry as much weight as anybody else's. I think something special is happening, and I love it. And this is where I say it messy, before you assume that it was tidy all along. Thanks so much, and I'll see you next week.